pointing, cutting, cutting, speaking some more. This is a prototype that I have built of hand tracking as it could relate to word processing, or rather writing, or rather creating and arranging words and ideas and having a literal space to be able to think about them. It's an extension of a lot of the ideas that I came up with in Word Reality in 2017. There's a link to that in the description. Word Reality was an attempt to play with spatializing an information creation context, having the ability to put things in different spaces. That was made in HTC Vive, had a little bit of speech recognition, but was mostly sort of centered on making use of the Vive wand. It turns out that using an HTC Vive, as well as the infrared tracking, because it uses infrared tracking, as well as the infrared tracking for Leap Motion, which is the sort of current best in class of hand tracking, is pretty buggy at best. But I really wanted to revisit some of the ideas that I had in that. One, because writing is cool. Some of my best friends are writers, and they say they're cool, so I must definitely believe them. But also because very recently at Oculus Connect 6, Oculus announced that the current generation of hardware that they are shipping, the Oculus Quest, is going to get native hand tracking as a feature update, a software update coming in 2020. And that's super exciting because I think while right now it's sort of primarily conceived of, and indeed all virtual reality right now in any consumer context is really exclusively thought of as a consumer-focused device, mostly on entertainment. My interest is in something that is a lot more productivity-focused, that is a lot more enmeshed in the concept of productivity and expression. And I think that hands are an incredibly critical key to that, not just because hands are cool and you can do all sorts of wiggly things with them. They have much higher dimensionality than anything you can do on a keyboard. And in fact, because we do things with keyboards, with our hands, with good enough tracking, with a good enough sort of marriage of intent with tracking ability, I am really confident that the expressiveness that we can get from a completely unencumbered hand is something really incredible. But also because of what we lost. In virtual reality, the expectation is that you're around places, you don't have the same kind of hard registration cues that that your hands are going to be directly over a keyboard or whatever. And so it becomes pretty difficult to use most of the input mechanisms that have had a hard reliance on these incredibly high levels of precision in an incredibly fixed kind of vantage point. Your hands work directly over your keyboard, but they don't really work anywhere else. So, and if you're on a headset, you don't have the ability to identify with the same level of accuracy exactly where your keyboard is going to be, that kind of thing. So that's why, that's some of the why of why I was doing this. So within Word Reality, I really like the idea of having these text fragments, breaking apart the concept of the space that you're working in, so that you have this guy over here, this guy over here, indicating, all of the different ideas. I think that one of the most important parts of writing is actually being able to arrange things and coming up with certain drafts and being able to see them next to each other in order to come up with a canonical view of how they should be arranged. So the task of writing per se is coming up with things and saying, like, it was the worst of times. It was the best of times. There were so many times. Just so many times, you guys. So now I've got, the basic ingredients of a really incredible story. And the next part of this is editing. It's sort of moving these things around and deciding which things make sense together in order to make a really beautiful and poetic, powerful speech. And so what I have is I have that handball you saw just there. I won't say anything while I'm doing it because otherwise it'll end up in the world. But you can see as I open my hand, there's a ball that emerges in the middle, and once it goes from grade red, that indicates that it's actually recording. I sort of was amused by the idea of the ambiguity between sort of a glowing ball of fire inside of the middle of somebody's hand and the basic sort of red recording circle that is understood to mean recording is happening now. And that's just kind of what I go for when I make my interfaces is funny jokes. So, I can do that. I can say, so you can see my hand, nothing happening, but we're recording now. Or recording now, that's fine. I guess I mumble, my apologies. And then you can see sort of similar to that, in that sort of gray to red triggered state thing, that this finger, as it straightens out, it has a laser light coming off of the end of it, and once it goes red, that means that it's active. This is something that I use for dragging or moving things around. And here I can move around this statement. I can point at it, and you can see also that there are these pretty aggressive lines indicating what it seems like I might be wanting to be merging this statement with. So I got this, and if I bring it close enough there, or recording now, it was the best of times. Not the most amazing of statements, and maybe it's actually something that I don't really like, and so I can cut it apart again as well. I've got a knife, and if I bring it down over here, or recording now, it was the best of times, I can kind of take that thing back and reconsider how I want to put these things together. So if I think like just so many times, you guys, that's a really nice statement. It was I've release those, put those together like that. That's all recording now, just so many times, you guys. It was the best of times. I mean, can you argue with the poetic beauty of that? Like, what does it matter what the specifics of this tool are if I can come up with such inspired speech? Sorry, I don't do writing as a job. I do writing things for writing. That wasn't actually my hand, that was some random drift. So yeah, I think that there are some really incredible opportunities from leveraging the best of technology. Obviously, this is a little flaky, but it's really more meant as a provocation and as a suggestion that one, writing can be considered in something more than the sort of a canonical way that we can think of text entry. There are definitely some downsides to it. I'm a huge fan of writing things out with a pen and paper because I think of the contemplative aspect of it, the things that come out in terms of how considered those words necessarily are. I would be entirely for a digitally mediated system that actually made direct use of those kinds of written words. The objection that I have with the sort of the pen and paper writing context that we have available to us right now is that those words are semantically meaningless to any sort of digitally mediated system. I think that if you could know more about words, then you have the ability to leverage a lot more stuff. Like Word Reality had the word count, but you can also do a lot more with words in terms of auto summary. You can use hidden Markov modeling to figure out probabilistically whether your statement is more like J.K. Rowling or E.M. James. And things like generative adversarial networks, or GANs, can sort of hallucinate and transmute words into things that are more like E.M. James or J.K. Rowling. Those are the only two people that can sort of copy. I don't make the rules. But you're right. So like you can do a lot more stuff with it once it's in a digital space. To that end, the input mechanisms that would be more primarily mediated through kind of a pen and paper or a typed interface definitely have merit. I think that as a consequence of developing expertise on those higher levels, we would definitely find some really interesting things to do. But my objective here is to show some of the shortfalls of our imagination as a consequence of having such a hard expectation about what writing necessarily is at this point. And so, you could do a lot of really interesting things with writing in a context where you are actually writing with pen and paper, as long as it has some aspect of digital mediation, or where you're typing. Also, no objection there. There are problems when you're in a VR environment in terms of the limitations of real estate that you get as a consequence of either needing to write on the surface or be next to a keyboard in order to do that. So there are also other real legitimate uses or rationales for being able to explore having these VR mediated abilities in an intrinsically dimensional space. So that's it. That's my TED Talk. Thanks for coming.